what is a pulse check for how the Democratic Party is doing in the United States? The Virginia governorship, Republican businessman Glenn Youngkin defeated Democrat Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, who served in 2014, 2018. In Virginia, you can't run back-to-back, or you can't serve back-to-back terms, so McAuliffe took a term off, came back, and lost. And a Republican hasn't won the governorship there in 12 years. So it's a nice pulse check on how people are feeling about how the Democrat Party is doing right now. School lockdowns were a big issue in this election. Youngkin hammered home on that. Based on a recent UNICEF report, the U.S., more than any other rich nation, has had schools closed down longer than anyone else. Something to think about, and it's the reason that Youngkin was able. One of the main reasons that Youngkin was able to take the win. Also, in the backdrop of critical race theory, that was part of this. We'll get into that, and also the backdrop of violent crime increasing across the United States. This whole defund the police thing has actually been looking like a failing strategy, where Black and Hispanic Dems are actually more likely than white Dems to want to increase police spending, and we'll get into that. That's my quick 60-second, because I got to cut that out anyway. So yeah, like I said, this is and also with police spending, this is Pew research. This is polling. This isn't bullshit. Black and Hispanic Dems are more likely than white Dems to want to increase police spending. That may come as a shock to you, and if it comes as a shock to you, then it came as a shock to me. We got to look in the mirror. And across the board in 2021 versus 2020, a huge increase in people, those that want to actually increase police spending. So this was not a big issue in this governorship election, but it is something to think about. It is something to think about in the context of how the Democratic Party and what their ideals they're pushing, what their strategies they're using, how are they doing, how are they faring. Every single place, area in the state, every single corner of the state in Virginia leaned more Republican than it did 2 years ago when the Biden election occurred. It is something to think about. Biden won by 10 points in Virginia, and then now we have a Republican governorship. So it's a pulse check. It's something to think about. Again, I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm personally disgusted by the way the Republican Party has conducted themselves the past 5 years, especially with perpetuating lies that Trump did in fact win the 2020 presidential election. It's absolutely insanity. But what kind of pisses me off almost even more is the fact that the party is literally, it's hard to say they're a joke because they're still winning. So I'm not going to call them a joke, but the extreme things they've done, and the Democratic Party is such in shambles that they can't figure out a way to defeat a party that literally is lying about math. It's lying about the number of votes that were counted. That's worth looking in the mirror. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see if the Dems can maintain their control, and it's looking like they won't be able to. And that's why I said this is a pulse check. It's all very interesting because, you can talk about, at the end of the day, when you're running a campaign and you're giving a certain message, you can't argue with the result. So you can't argue that, okay, Trump won in 2016. You can't say, oh, well, you can say, no, he didn't shove your head into the ground. Or you can say, okay, what was the message he was pushing? What was the message Youngkin was pushing here versus the message that McAuliffe was pushing? There's always a lesson to be gained. So that's the beauty of democracy. It's not like, oh, okay, it was a fluke. There was a total fluke, and they happened to do one Hail Mary at the end of the game. No, this isn't a sport. This is democracy. Every person has a vote. Now, granted, you can dive into things like, oh, turnout was lower, things like that, but and that is a part. But a lot of this is messaging, and that's why I'm diving into, just the way that I think it's not crazy that Republicans are running on a platform of, oh, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe businesses are good. Maybe it's a good idea for businesses to be open as much as possible. Now, obviously, there's safety concerns. I'm not saying that with COVID, but I'm just saying that's the platform they're running. Oh, maybe our little ones shouldn't be wearing masks. Maybe schools should be open. Maybe the school boards do have too much control and are trying to protect themselves by not trying to teach the kids. There was a lot of coverage early on in this pandemic that, especially before the Delta variant, where, yo, bro, keep schools open. Kids don't fucking get this shit. And obviously, there's different strategies you need. Obviously, you don't want to put teachers at risk, and that's a big part of this. But everything is about trade-offs. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. So if, there's no perfect solution. We have a speed limit that's 65 on the freeway. Yeah, people go faster than that. But if the speed limit was 90, or if the speed limit was 40, would we have fewer deaths? Almost certainly. Would that be worth the trade-off, taking that much longer to get everywhere, being that much less efficient to transport goods, services, to get to your doctor's appointment, et cetera, et cetera? Probably not worth the risk. But 100 people die a day in the United States due to fatalities. 100 people die in the United States a day. 36,000 a year. That's crazy. But we've generally accepted that as a risk. People, the Democratic Party, across the board, did not accept that there was going to be a risk in keeping our kids. Education is so important. Many people would say worth dying for. Now, obviously, to say, we are putting adults at risk by, and I'm not talking about now. Now this thing is, Colorado, I was just reading, it's a hotbed right now. Their hospitals are filling up, but we are definitely moving in the right direction here as a country with where the numbers are. But it's just something to think about. To say, okay, we're not going to make any risk. We're just going to shut down schools, fully remote. Okay, well, yeah, that now you're talking about a year, 18 months of kids schooling, and especially lower income students, black and brown kids that have gotten screwed because of that. That have fallen behind because of that. Now it's an honest question to say, okay, maybe we are putting some people at risk to keep teaching our youth, but welcome to reality. Everything is a risk. There's no such thing as perfection, and this is something that Youngkin really dove in on, and it worked. And in one of their debates, McAuliffe had a quote that says, "Parents should not have an input in." Basically, parents should not have an input in what the schools teach. So, something to that effect. Anyway, the Youngkin campaign hammered on that. I think New York Times said 29% of his campaign ads mentioned that. And when you think about it, it is a hell of a thing to say. Of course, parents should have an input. And granted, it's clickbaity. It was taken, and just that one sentence was used. So I get out of context, but damn, I think it's part of the ethos that maybe. You got to look at all this stuff in context. Maybe that's going to make Republicans feel the Democrats, come off as the government knows what's best. The government knows what's best for you, and you got to look at this stuff in context. So yeah, that's not what that is saying. But how are you going to interpret that as a parent? I'm not a parent, but as a parent, someone saying, my school knows best. Fuck you. The school doesn't know best. What do you mean the school knows? It's my kid. So. I can only imagine. But it's an interesting situation the Democratic Party is in, which I think the Dems focus on the wrong things. I think it's ridiculous. I think they have a layup with the amount that they can do. And granted, they got the executive branch, they got the Senate, they got the House, they got all three. All three haven't been flipped since 1896, I think, after an incumbent. Some crazy thing like that. So they did win. So I'm not saying, oh shit, they didn't win. When Biden won, they flipped all those. And the Senate 50-50 technically flipped because the VP is the tie-breaking vote, which that was a big win. That was a big deal. That was a middle finger to Trump, and also on the popular vote, of course. But it's like, come on, bro. This is just it's interesting. It's interesting stuff. Now let's talk about critical race theory here. Now I'm going to define this because I think a lot of people talk about it. Frankly, I didn't know the full definition of it until I looked it up. This is just pulled straight from Wikipedia, so I'm just going to read it. And before let me add some context here. So this was also a part of the Youngkin and McAuliffe governorship campaign. This did come up. Yes, it was overblown a little bit. There was one of the Virginia education superintendents had a reading list that was passed around that had some critical race theory books on it, and I think maybe one of those or something filtered down to some kids in some schools. I don't exactly. The point is, though, it wasn't like this became a bigger. This was made to be a bigger deal than it actually was. So Youngkin really hammered on it, even though it wasn't as if it was disseminating across every school in the state like I think his campaign wanted you to believe. And McAuliffe even said, yo, bro, chill. This isn't actually the case. So anyway, but again, you have to view this in the backdrop of, God, what's his name? I was just reading an opinion piece by Ross Dutat, which he pointed out. Well, let me read the definition, and then we'll get into kind of why it's important a little bit here. So, okay, so critical race theory is a body of legal scholarship and an academic movement of U.S. civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race and U.S. law and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice. CRT examines social, cultural, and legal issues primarily as they relate to race and racism in the U.S. A tenet of CRT is that racism and disparate racial outcomes are the result of complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics rather than explicit and intentional prejudices of individuals. Okay, so now that I've read that definition, I'm not even going to color that because I just want to say that because I just read it and I'm not an expert on CRT, but that is the definition pulled straight from Wikipedia. So the CRT, and I'm talking about voters here. I'm going to avoid sharing my personal opinion on this. This is the way it has been kind of pictured. So CRT, though, was not a big part of this election. Voters, obviously, there was a lot of, meaning it was a big part of this election, but it shouldn't have been. Right? In my opinion, it wasn't again, for the reasons I mentioned, it wasn't as if this was being, taught in Virginia schools. It wasn't running rampant in the schools like I think the Youngkin campaign was saying it was. But in Ross Dutat's opinion piece in the New York Times, he was saying it was less about CRT. It was less about CRT, critical race theory, and more about the backdrop in which everything by the Dems on the left, increasingly on the left, everything is viewed through a lens of race. You cannot have a conversation without talking about race. And Ross's point in his opinion piece was that Republicans are tired of that. They're like, what? They're done with it. They're sick of it. They're like, why is this need to come up in every single facet of our life? Not everything is race. And I think it's an interesting point, especially when you have MLK saying judge by the content of our character. My kids judge by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. So there's even some classical liberal folks that would say critical race theory is putting way too much emphasis on race. And I think right here, this is the Youngkin campaign used that to rally Republican voters, to rally some swing voters, and convince voters that, hey, you want your kids learning in the classroom that everything is about race and they should always, be walking through a laser grid and be very careful. And when they talk to someone, they should first look at them through the lens of what color their skin is and then act accordingly versus look at them and act based on who they are as a person, what things they enjoy doing, what interests they have, et cetera, et cetera. So it was hammered on and it worked. Now in any reason for an event to occur, what percent of this was, I don't think there's any way to know, but it is something I think generally that there's a backlash against the woke left where they are hammering on this point, and people just aren't buying it. They're just not buying it. Okay, so I think that's kind of the quick hot take on all this stuff. I'm going through my notes here. I think I think we just about did it. Okay. Well, Mr. Youngkin won in Chesterfield County, outside of Richmond, and Stafford County in an exurb. I don't know what an exurb is. A suburb, and I don't know, an exurb of Washington D.C. Both places that Mr. Biden carried in 2020. So Biden won in 2020. Boom, he has lost those now. Mr. Youngkin, the Republican, Youngkin won in those where Biden had won. And it's pretty crazy looking at the map of which way it swung. Virginia, all across the board, swung Republican. Oh, more Republican than he did in the previous election, in the Biden election. Now, another thing, to talk about. Youngkin has been towing the line. He's not a full Trumper, and he's been very careful about supporting Trump and not outright saying, no, fuck you, Trump, but also not being like, yeah, this is our guy. He's done it. Frankly, him and his campaign seem to have done a phenomenal job of towing the line, of being able to use that Trump base for the votes, and also be able to get some of the swing voters by not being crazy. And he did say, this was only, as the New York Times pointed out, only after he won the primaryship. He did say that Biden won the presidential election. So he waited till he got the primary, then he said, okay, Biden won. So he's towing that line. So I wouldn't say this is a full, and that's actually telling in and of itself, the fact that he felt his campaign had to do that. Maybe if he went full Trumper, maybe I'm thinking he probably would have lost. But the fact that he had to toe that line, are the winds blowing in the right direction? Because we could be in a situation where he just said full Trump won, boom, and then won, and then holy schnitzel. So there's some silver lining there. The fact that he did have to toe the line and not go full Trump is, in my opinion, a good sign that he had to do that to win the election. Okay, it's interesting. I'll be straight up. Always talking about political stuff. I redid the intro like 5 times. I was like, dude, talking about political stuff, I always feel like I'm walking through a laser grid, especially when it comes to issues of race. Of course, you want to be careful about these issues, but I do feel the political climate. You can't really be wrong in these situations. So I'm really, careful. We can't just riff and make a mistake. And I get that. You got to give these issues the attention they deserve. But I think generally, what it does is because people can't even talk about it. I mean, you can't make a mistake. The only way you can learn is if you can talk about things and make mistakes. And I'm not saying say racist things. I'm saying maybe say something about race that someone would say, oh, I actually don't agree with that, or let's talk about that, or have a conversation about that. So anyway, appreciate you listening. This is it, dude. We're in it. And Democratic Party, I mean, hopefully they take this as a sign. Tighten up your message, bro. Fix it. And I actually personally think I honestly don't have a dog in the fight. My dog in the fight is the United States of America, and frankly, just humanity in general. I want freedom for individuals. I don't care if you're American or not. As much freedom for individuals as possible. I believe in free markets. I believe in well-functioning government. I believe that government should be afraid of the people, not the other way around. So I'm not a Democrat. I want the Dems to win. I'm not a Republican. I want the Republicans. I want both parties to be highly functioning entities. I want them to not be fucking stupid. Both of them, they should both hold each other accountable. So when one of them starts acting completely ridiculous, or both of them, frankly, right now, in my opinion, but not false equivalency, I do think saying an election was stolen is worse than the Dems failing strategies. But damn, we need to do better. There's a dearth of leadership in this country. I truly believe we need to fucking do better. It's ridiculous. We can do better. I'm optimistic. Damn. Okay, everyone. This is Dick Lucas, No Gradient Podcast. You can find it wherever podcasts are available. Just search No Gradient. You can also find it on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter, Dick C. Lucas, Instagram, Dick C. Lucas, and on TikTok, I'm just Dick Lucas. I always post there when I drop a new show. Check it out there. Also, rate, subscribe, rate on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube. Would really appreciate it. Go ahead and smash that like button. It just helps the show get more, help support the show. And drop a comment. Let me know what you think. For, against, talk to me. This is all. Hey, listen. It's all a conversation. I don't claim to be right. No one should claim I should have a monopoly on the truth, okay? We're having conversations. This is how we learn. Sometimes we make mistakes and we riff on those things. That's what fucking learning is. Welcome to the real world. Okay.